the SHSS podcast. Let's talk learning.
Today we welcome to the podcast photographer John Minihan. Tell us a bit about yourself.
What's your first name again?
Noa.
No, my name is John Minihan and I'm a photographer. I feel I've always been a photographer since I was about 14. And you know when I just knew that? Because I left Ireland with my aunt and uncle when I was I was born in Dublin, but you know, my hometown was a County Kildare because it's really important to have a sense of place. And for certainly, I think I was born in 1946, and I was only thinking about it on the way driving down here from Skibbereen, because when I said my aunt and uncle reared me up, my father died before I was born, and my mother left me with a sister, and my aunt and uncle reared me up, and they were just the most amazing people. And of course, I knew there was something wrong, because I didn't feel, I was being passed around with a lot of aunts because they were big. There was about 8 sisters, and I remember there was one brother. So I felt this absolutely tsunami of love because I was being wheeled around by lots of different people. And I must have only been about, 12 months old at the time. And even then, I started always visually becoming really aware, because my aunt and uncle lived in this, what I call a corporation house in a County Kildare. There was about a dozen of these houses altogether. I call it sometimes Pluman's Palace as opposed to Pluman's Terrace, because sometimes people don't want to talk about where they were born or where they were born in a corporation house. I'm rather proud of it, actually, because it was a further thing that gave me a sense of, there are cul-de-sacs I'm going to go down. I was aware of certain things that I wasn't quite like everybody else, simply because they had mothers and fathers, which seems quite natural, and I had an aunt and uncle. And my name was Minihan, of course, and their name was Collison. So all these little things helped to shape me, become aware of my own surroundings, my social surroundings and bits and bobs. And I started realizing, how important my own faith was to me at this time, because there were certain things I was familiar with. Being taken to Mass on a Sunday, a lot of the iconography of the town, everyone had the pubs were owned by, Purcell's pub or Kelly's pub or Doyle's bar or something like that. Just everyone had their own bits and bobs. And the reason I'm telling you is because I always remember somebody said to me a couple of years ago, John, what's the first photograph you ever saw? And immediately I had to say, well, probably when I was about 5, taken to Mass on a Sunday. When you're about 5, I couldn't, I was just with my aunt and uncle. I always remember there certain smells at the chapel there, and the incense, and there was a certain, I felt in harmony with what was going on. And I remember the prayer book was open, and it was bulging with all these little black and white cards they were just black and white with a kind of black at the top, and a rather smudgy black and white photograph of a loved one. And I could tell by the black and white, like there was something, there was something about it which meant I had to look at it. I couldn't read the text, but all the years afterwards, and then I kept becoming, I was growing up in a Thai. I was very aware of the funerals. If somebody passed away, there'd be a certain ritual over 2 nights and 3 days. People would be coming in and doing things, and these little cards would be on the door saying that there was a bereavement, and I would watch through silhouetted figures. These curtains, you'd see the women in there obviously dressing the body, irrespective of how poor they were. There was this sense of serenity and respect about the world. The fact that this was not perfection. There's obviously something else out there. Anyway, I started hoovering up all these imagery. I was just there, So that was probably the first time I saw a photograph in Mass when I was 5, or possibly 6, but no older than that.
Tell us your best memory from your school days.
my best memory from my school days. And there was what's your first name again?
Shan.
Shan. There were so many different memories I've had. First of all, to be blessed with my aunt and uncle, to be part of a team. Going to a school was, I felt, I was like everybody else. And I always remember in this particular school I went to, Christian Brothers at the Thigh County Kildare. As you walked into the school, it had a huge big tree. And of course, once during the season, the tree would be absolutely blossoming with chestnuts. The conkers, as they used to call them. You play those things, where you put them up and you do it. And that was great sense of fun. This tree was just plenty full of these conkers, and it looked enormous, like potatoes. And people, kids used to do it. We used to all do that. But that was a happy memory for me. That conker tree, and then the lunch hour. I got I got a little jug of milk and what looked like a bun, but it tasted wonderful. To me then, to be given this bun. And these were happy memories.
And what was it like being an apprentice to a photographer in London at age 12?
While I was at the school, I left at 15, St. Edmund's Secondary Mod School, but I saw an advert in the evening news for an office boy on the London Daily Mail. And I thought, suddenly that attracted me, Fleet Street, go down there. Anyway, I got the job, and there was, I saw a man called Bert Redding. And he was in charge of the office boys, which was, newspapers then were just amazing. Not like they are today with screens up there. And, you go into a newspaper office and you're all, journalism. But when you walked into an editorial floor of a colossus like the Daily Mail, the sounds of typewriters and dozens of what they call tape machines, which are spewing out. You know what I say, tape machines? These are Associated Press, United Press International, Agency French Press, blah, blah. There's about a dozen of these different agencies spewing out folios of stories that were happening all around the world. And then, of course, part of my job was picking up photographs, which were like, for example, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. I'm not sure if I get my dates wrong, but I think it was 1963. I was then an apprentice in the darkroom, and I would, I'd have to go to I was in the darkroom in 1963, but I'd be running up to the darkroom with photographs coming in from around the world, which weren't really. They needed more contrast in them, so they'd be copied again, so they could be transmitted to newspaper offices like the Daily Mail or the Daily Express or the Times. These absolutely. They're run by, heavy gravity. It was called the Fourth Estate. This was real powerful. Fleet Street was just amazing. And I'd take these photographs into the darkroom so they could be copied again. And then they would be sent to regional offices the Daily Mail had regional offices in Glasgow, in Liverpool, in Manchester, and in Cardiff. So they could be, and of course, one of those pictures I would have developed myself, John F. Kennedy assassination. I'm sort of like, I'm 17, I'm handling this piece of history. And I knew why I was doing that. Because I couldn't get away from Athy County Kildare and that edifice of when I'd go into Fleet Street every day, looking at St. Paul's Cathedral. Incredible. I used to go and have my lunch in St. Paul's. Anyway, but that was my first thing, being the office boy, and then this man, Bert Redding, saying, John, there's an apprenticeship coming, would you like it? He could have given it to anybody else, but for some reason, he chose me. And, I was very grateful for that, really, because it just changed my life.
When did you buy your first camera?
I think my first camera actually was when I was 16. It was a copy. It was called a Yashica mat. The Germans you would have seen the ads on television. Germans, they make great cars, they make great cameras. I've always wanted a Mercedes, never had one yet. But I'd always like to have a two-seater 1960s metallic Mercedes. So any of you ever win the lottery, remember that's my dream. You can still pick one up, I think, for about 10 grand, I think. This is the important thing, you see. I mean, I'm at the last panel of the triptych. You know what I mean by triptych? 3-panel. It really comes from, it's a religious thing where you with the Annunciation, it's 3 panels. Francis Bacon, the painter who I got to know, in fact, he would have done a lot of those, what they call triptychs, incredible 3 panels. And I'm on the last panel, my triptych. You're in the beginning of yours, the sort of, the Russian writer, Tolstoy, boyhood, youth, and manhood. And I don't know what is the other opposite for the girls, whatever it would be, but boyhood, youth, and manhood. You have to be aware now. You're on the grid. This is why I can't emphasize how important it is not to allow your soul to be stolen by these things. Because already it's happening. You're the power base. The reason why we have these great writers, even as I said, particularly, even, revolutionary figures like Ho Chi Minh, like Michael Collins, like Nelson Mandela, we had them because they had a voice and they had the courage to say no, not yes. Lies are lies. You can't, there's nothing, people tell lies to tell lies. You can't, you don't even have to reason it. Some things in this world today, in your world that you've inherited, because you switch on the TV and you're just assaulted. You're just assaulted by awful things on the television. As if it's like a daily, oh, how terrible, give me another cheese sandwich. It's awful. You shouldn't have to reason the absolute sort of, barbarity of killing of children, women, men, whatever. It's just awful. And people have to do things about it. And you're the power base, which down the line, who knows? I mean, one of you could win the Booker Prize. One of you could be in a New York Times bestseller. One of you will be there. So you've always got to keep that baby bio, keep replenishing yourself spiritually, because that's the essence of it. This is why you can't waste a second now. You're on the grid. And, it's special. You've all got people in your life who you love, and they're going to be out there, infusing you to do the right thing. But there'll also be a coterie of people, in fact, who just, they'll have a different persuasion than you, and they'll, so you've got to be incredibly alert. And I say this because I have a son of mine. I always say to him, Bosco, his name is Bosco. And it's called after a saint, St. John Bosco. He was into boxing. And when I came to live in Ireland 30 years ago, there was a clown. I had a clown on TV called Bosco or something. And people say, why do you call your son after a clown? But it wasn't. He was called after St. John Bosco. Yeah, just to be in control. That's what's important. And to read, I say, Bosco, you have to read newspapers. Don't get the information from this, because if you go out there and you buy a newspaper, whatever, what it's the Irish Times, the Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Sunday Independent, everything in that hard copy you buy has been legalized. It's gone through the legal office and it's there. You can't always be sure that any information you get from this thing is the truth, because it's not necessarily. Every day I buy a newspaper, every day. And I've been doing that for 60 years.
And what kind of camera do you use now?
I've got two types. For a photographer like me, there are 2 types of cameras. There's a Rolleiflex camera, which again is a German camera, which is, they call it 2 1/4 square. You know what I mean? Like I see the world in terms, which only takes 12 exposures. which means, first of all, you have to think. Not like some of my friends say, oh, by the way, John, if you get a digital camera, you can take hundreds. Yeah, but I see people with these digital cameras, and they're out there and they're taking photographs and they're doing this and doing this. And then the word that comes up in here is delete. If you don't like it, get rid of it. So what you're doing, you're deleting a little piece of history. You don't delete anything. You take something. First of all, as soon as you click the shutter, that's important here. That moment's gone. You can't recapture that. So that's the Rolleiflex. Then there's the 35mm camera like this yoke here. This is a Nikon Japanese 35, which gives me, by the time I buy a roll of film, just the whole organic process of going out, buying the film, putting it on the camera, and being in control. Because when I put a roll of film in there, and I expose the film, and as I'm looking at you, I'm looking at what's all around you. That's where my mind thinks. Looking at what's, there's an aura about things, looking at what's around you. And as soon as I put it into camera, as film, that belongs to me. Doesn't belong to Google or Instagram or Twitter or any of those other. I'm not part of that. I say to my daughter and my sons, don't send me anything. I don't want to know. I'm not on Facebook. Don't put me on Facebook. Because if you have an analog camera and you go out there and you photograph that tree down the road there, or a beautiful statue, I don't know how many times I passed this school, looked at it, and thought, yeah, school, it has a sense of just something. Every school is so important. I remember I just asked me about my last days in my own school, Christian Brothers. I said, I have wonderful memories. I've only got happy memories of the Christian Brothers. I'm sorry, I've got no sordid stories to tell anybody. But of course, things happen. But when you're taking photographs and you go out and buy a digital camera, remember, nothing belongs to you. It all belongs to Getty or to somebody else or to Facebook or to this thing or Instagram or whatever. I don't know what it is. People say to me, but John, if you're on, you could make money. Well, of course I would. I'd love that. We all like a few extra Barney Dylans in the tank, but it's not about the money. I'm 95% photographer and I'm 5% business. But I do feel I'm God's photographer. I see the right things and I do the right things. So when you're embarking in journalism, some of you might be a photojournalist. You may embark down the road of photography. When I'm watching the news, I'm watching Al Jazeera or I'm watching CNN or, Sky or whatever they call it. The amount of journalists who are shot in a theater of war. Now, I understand how important digital photography is because we're in the now world. I want it now, John, not in 4 weeks' time, because sometimes I get a call from what used to be called Fleet Street, say, might be the Daily John, there's a Victorian telephone box down in Castletown Bear. Can you do a picture for us? Now, years ago, Olympus gave me an Olympus digital camera. I've only used it about maybe a dozen times. But I will do one because that's fine. But most of the time, it's film, it's Nikon with a variety of lenses. Because again, the lenses are important. The Rolleiflexes tend to be all fixed. It's an 80mm lens, what they call a standard lens. And I just love it. Like on the way down here this morning, I think I may have told this actually to Caragh, but there's a nun's chapel in Skibbereen. And about 15 years ago, they demolished it. But before they did, I got permission from the nuns to photograph the nun's chapel. Because it's important to me to do this, because some of the greatest art in the world I've seen in chapels. I couldn't afford to go to the Prado, and I think the Prado's in Madrid, isn't it? But I know about the Prado because Francis Bacon, of course, before he died, he wanted to go to one of his favorite artists was Velázquez, and that's another story down the line. But anyway, Yeah. I'm coming down this morning, and this chapel, of course, it was vandalized some, I don't know, 8 years ago, burnt down. I can't imagine it. But there's no roof on the chapel now, but there is an icon of the mother and child stenciled at the top of the of the roof. Now, if that was a Banksy, what do you call them? Banksy, you know the artists I'm talking about? They go around and they go and then it disappears. And I've been looking at that mural for about 3 or 4 years now. Bearing in mind, I photographed the chapel while it was intact. And I didn't see it when I was in there. But, so this morning I took the camera down and I've got a long lens and I'm going to try and photograph that, icon. It's the mother and child and it's disappearing into the ether. And that's what digital photography is. It has no material reality. It's ether or vapor. That's it. With this, you want to be in control of what you do. You know what I mean? It's like a hard copy. When you're out there, you type, you got it like Mozart's musical score. It's there. That's what you see. Hold on to it. It's like the Kindle. You can't go up to an author and say, will you sign my Kindle? It doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense to me anyway. But I love those kind of things. But anyway, forgive me. What's your first name again?
Sean.
Shauna, forgive me. Sometimes I get so excited about photography, I go into a tangent, but we were right back at the same thing. But it's about your control right now, what you have. Each and every one, you have the ability to write a great story. It'll be great journalism, and you're going to need help down the way, all of us. You know what I mean? Because I know that with my own children. You have 3 of them. There's going to be one maybe needs a bit more help than the other 2. And but here, as Brendan Behan's mother once said to me, said, John, they can't all be geniuses. Brendan, of course, was the genius. So this is the exciting part of your life, now. This is it. And this is why I'm so proud to be here with you today, talk to you. I hope it makes a bit of sense. How are we doing so far?
Excellent.
Huh?
Excellent.
Good.
What inspired you to photograph the wake of Katie Tyrrell?
Again, going back, when I was young, I seem to have spent a lot of my time watching funerals and the tippity clop of horses at the then war, the funeral cortege. And I'd be dragged after it sometimes, but I used to love it. I mean, this ritualistic, no matter how poor the people were, there were always barrels of Guinness coming in and lots of sandwiches, and people were just, there was a great degree of neighborliness. And people, like now with TV, people sometimes don't even know who their next door neighbor is. But then it wasn't that kind of world today. And already, and again, the faith, the excitement of knowing that when I started when I was an apprentice, I was going home, and I thought I'd always been collecting books on the American Depression, the sort of Dust Bowl, what they call the Dust Bowl period in America during the 30s. And, which came out of all these great books, in fact, and Steinbeck's, Grapes of Wrath. And I remember reading a book by a man called, a photographer called Walker Evans and James Agee, the writer. There was a collaboration. I love those collaborations. One of you boys, there's no boys here, but one of you girls may well be collaborating somewhere down the future with somebody else. And there'll be a photographer with you or something. You don't know. It's so exciting, all what's going to happen to you. But you've always got to be careful. And when I when I was 21 in the dark room, and then when I always know I wanted to do it. I wanted to photograph my own tradition where it came from, because I knew that if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to be done. And I am God's photographer. I'm going to do this with a little help from the spiritual world. You got to believe in your own power to survive. Like about 15 years ago, which is probably, some of you weren't probably even born then, but there was a wonderful story I remember. There there were some miners, Chilean miners. I'm only throwing this aside, Sean, to give you an idea. Because good things happen in the world, and when we do it, sometimes TV can be amazing to show us. But there were 32 miners incarcerated in Chile, somewhere in Europe or something. The world had caved in. And the whole of the world came together to get these miners out of this wretched hole, which was like a tube. I mean, it's insane. But anyway, they made this tube so that a human being could go down into the bowels of the earth. And I watched it day and night and watched these men coming out. And I thought that was one of the wonderful stories. It was a miracle that this happened. And to see their face when they saw daylight after 3 or 4 weeks, they know that, it was just amazing. So good is always happening, and the essence of good always overpowers evil, and it's important. And the wake of Katie Tyrrell, photographing aside from me, yes, I have any amount of pictures in bars and this, but there's funerals. But what I wanted was to photograph something that was going to give gravitas, which was the heartbeat of my essay on a thigh, and that was the wake. Because I remember, again, comes back to reading. There was a photographer, 19th century photographer called Nadar, and he photographed a writer called Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Mis. Les Mis, one of these things. Anyway, when Victor Hugo died, Nadar took this photograph of him on the deathbed, which was amazing. I saw it about 1965, because I used to love going around these old places in London, booksellers and outside, reselling them outside in markets. And I saw this amazing photograph by Nadar of Victor Hugo on his deathbed. I knew nothing about Victor Hugo, but it was such a reverential picture, and the solemnity of death, and this man in death, taken by his friend Nadar. And I thought, yes, this is it. I mean, this was like, and I knew that to get the opportunity to photograph a wake would be the heartbeat of everything I was going to do. And of course, that came in February 1977 when I was in the thigh, because I went back 2 and 3 times a year with my cameras to photograph love, life, and death. Again, we go back to the trilogy, love, life, and death. And, boyhood, manhood, boyhood, youth, man. Yeah. Anyway, all these little things happen because when I thought, this man, Bertie Doyle, I said, John, by the way, Mrs. Tyrrell passed away during the night. I said, Bertie, I'd love it if you could ask permission, because you got to get permission to do something like that. You can't just barge in. Mr. Doyle, Bertie Doyle, my friend, got permission from me. And for 2 nights and 3 days, I photographed the wake of Katie Tyrrell from deathbed to the grave. And the pictures are out there. You can track them down. And, of course, when I came to photograph Samuel Beckett, the publishers, I said, you can only publish the photographs if you publish my pictures of a thigh. And it took me 34 years to photograph this town. 34 years. Nobody's going to spend 34 years to anything like that. And it's never going to happen. So the wake was very important to me, and it's still important because so many little stories have happened, which I know, in fact, like, just very quickly, Sean, I'm sorry I'm going over again, but I get so excited because I remember having the pictures of the wake were published in a magazine called the British Journal of Photography. And I sometimes write, I'm not a writer, but I write captions about my photographs, and I've written stories for the papers and bits and bobs, and sometimes you can see my stories. And a man called Pat Matthews had seen my portfolio of photographs of the wake in this magazine called the British Journal of Photography, which, funny enough, George Bernard Shaw, who was an enthusiast, who was a writer, great writer, he was he loved photography. He'd written quite a lot about photography. But this man, Pat Matthews, had seen the pictures and had phoned me up, and he said, John, I've seen your photographs. I own a gallery in Mayfair, London, and I'd love to offer you a space to hang your pictures. Really? okay, well, how about, look, I'll put together 20 pictures and I'll come and see you tomorrow. Marvelous. So I went to see him and I showed him 20 of these photos. I said, right, okay, we had an exhibition and they were hanging on the wall. And then he phoned me up, tell me the day before the opening, which was on a Thursday, on a Wednesday, he said, John, don't be alarmed. One of your photographs of Mrs. Tyrrell has fallen off the wall. Really? Okay, I'll be down. So I went down and of course it had, only because I think, and this is just me, whoever hung them up didn't hang them up in sequence the way I saw it, the way Mrs. Tyrrell wanted to be perceived. You know, because even in death, you know, people say, oh, yeah, when you're dead, you're dead. It's not quite as simple as that. It's not quite as simple as that. I was actually there on that cold February morning to photograph Mrs. Tyrrell for a reason, because this has to be recorded. I have to be talking about the wake, which is part of your tradition today. Not part of Google or Instagram or Happy Snaps or this or that. It's about where you come from, what contribution you can make to the world we live in, because believe me, it needs a little bit of, you know, tweaking here and tweaking there. So I looked around, so I knew immediately. So I put the photograph where it should have been. When I walked into the wake room, I saw Mrs. Tyrrell dressed in the Legion of Burial shroud, which is, you know, blue is a color associated with the Madonna. And down the road there, I don't know how many times I passed by that statue. That I was acknowledging, I was giving her my very best wishes. Because it's the most important thing in my life. That emblematic statue of a mother and love of her child. It's so important to have this. Because each and every one of you here will one day understand, you know, why I'm saying this, how important it is. That's what's important. Because I am meant to tell you about this. So you, maybe in a small kind of way, I'm only a messenger. There are thousands of messengers. Because always remember, the good guys are going to win in the end. You know, good just has that power.
So our next question is, how did it come about that you were the first person on the scene to take Princess Diana's photo?
I was working for the Evening Standard. I start work at 7 in the morning. But this particular morning, about 6:10, I was in South Kensington in a greasy spoon. You know what they call a greasy, you know, the one of these little coffee shops where you can have your breakfast and stuff like that. I was reading the Daily Mail, again reading. And there was a column in the Daily Mail, which I always read, by a man called Nigel Dempster, who's really well linked in, you know, to the royal family. And it was just a paragraph. You always got to bear in mind, as every national story is local to somebody. So, you know, and I'm looking at this, it just says, oh yeah, Prince Charles, Prince Charles has relinquished his relationship with Sarah Spencer and is now courting her younger sister called Diana, who works in a kindergarten in Pimlico. Now, Pimlico, where I was only 10 minutes up the road from me. And I thought, Nigel Dempster, if he says this is happening, immediately I went up there, 10 to 7 in the morning. Of course, at that point in London, you imagine London, parents are dropping their kids off. In London, it's 24-hour city. Boom, you do it. Knocked the door. A lady came out with 3 barrel names. She said, you know, can I help you? I said, sorry, there's a story in the Daily Mail this morning. I'd like to speak to Lady Diana Spencer. Obviously, I knew that she'd been informed and they were going to expect the press, and I was the first person there. Dripping with cameras. I had, funny enough, these cameras, they're 35mm Nikons. I'd have an 85, the lenses are there, you know, you have a kind of a semi-tele lens and then a general view, what they call a 35mm, so you get that bit of space. So anyway, she went inside and then came out again and introduced me. There was this very vivacious, happy teenager, very bubbly, and she was rather giggly too, if I can remember, you know. Yes, what would you like us to do? I said, well, look, it'd be nice to photograph you with some of the children, you know, and I have to get permission. Obviously, newspapers are, you know, you have to get permission. So after permission was sought, the parents said yes. It only took about 5 minutes to make the phone calls, and it was a beautiful September morning. I always forget. I remember it there. And outside the school, the kindergarten, was this little bit of ground, and as I'm looking through my viewfinder here, you know, I handle it sort of, you know, it's so, you know, I mean, it's so wonderful, these things to me. And I'm looking at them sort of, and it's not what it is. I didn't have one of these on at the time, funny enough, but you know, and you're just there. And what I saw, it was just amazing. I knew, you know, like I'm photographing this beautiful, vivacious 18-year-old who's just about to embark, like you are, explode onto the world. And I'm the first person there taking the picture. And as I said, I'm photographing in a Madonna-esque kind of holding, and she's holding one child in her arm and holding the other child with her hand there. It was very special. And them days, of course, because you work for an evening paper, you're working with today for today's paper. So the dispatch writer was just there, you know, around the corner, shot the pictures and gave him the roll of film. Immediately, I noticed there was a latent image in this camera. I phoned up the editor and said, look, this is something really special. Because I made my own decision to do this. This is what you do. You're an ambassador for the paper you represent. You have to make the decisions. Because this picture ends up on the front page, and then it was on page 2, on page 3. It was just, that was it. By the time Diana got back to her apartment, she was looking at this picture. We know that Prince Charles had said, I didn't realize she had such gorgeous legs. And you know, anyway, by the time I sent my film back, everybody else from the street started arriving. Camera crews, so-called paparazzi, and just about everybody turned up. And she wouldn't come out again. I brought her out. Because they asked me, I said, okay, you know, because that's what you do. You have to give something back. I thought, I didn't. I mean, at the time, maybe I should have just let it go and then they would have had to use my picture. But that's not the kind of person I am. It's like today, money is like confetti. It has to be spread about. You know, it has to be spread about. But Diana came out for me. She did it again because I told Little White Lie. I said, look, I've sent the film back and they think there might be a problem in the darkroom. It was a little white, not much. But anyway, she came out and she recreated the scene again. I took more pictures, anyway, but I had the picture. It was already on the paper. It was there. So that was the genesis of that picture. 2 weeks after I shot the picture, she's everywhere. I mean, you know, there's not a cover magazine, newspaper in the world, TV screen that hasn't seen what this lady looks like. And she gets into a minicar and she drives to Berkeley Square. And she's followed by a posse of photographers and I call them bounty hunters, some of them, you know, because they do it, you know, that's what they are. Bounty hunters, you know, they're not doing this, there's not passion there. When you hear me talking, I may go around certain roundabouts, labyrinths here, but you can sense my passion at nearly 80 years of age, why I'm doing this. You know, I still love it because what I have, that's power. You can change the way people think in the most positive good way. Like you can change the way people think with your journalism. When you get, you know, when you get control. But yeah, so when she got to Berkeley Square, she was hounded. She went and sat on a wooden bench near the American Embassy. And she burst out crying. I thought, hello. I phoned up I said, I'm not doing this picture. Well, John, you're not paid to make decisions like that. I said, well, that's exactly what I am paid to do. I make decisions like that. It makes me angry.
We can really hear your passion when you're speaking.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is at 80 years of age. So, I mean, you know, how old are you now, girls? Tell me, what age are you now? Huh? 16. Okay, so you're on the grade, you're ready. That's it. You have to have the passion to do it. But the point I'm trying to say is, you know, checkbook journalism has always been a part of journalism, and it is to this day, in fact. But sometimes you have, the power to make your own decisions. You make the right decisions because right is right. And whatever you may feel at the time, it always addresses itself.
How did you come to photograph Samuel Beckett?
Well, again, I photographed Sam because of my photographs of a thigh. You see, when I said I've always been interested in the collaboration between writers and photographers, going back to, Victorian times, to a Victorian photographer called Julian Margaret Cameron, who photographed Alfred Lord Douglas, the first poet laureate. And we wouldn't know what wouldn't know what he looked like if it wasn't for Julian Margaret Cameron's photographs. And the same with Baudelaire. Nadar photographed Baudelaire and thing, but good collaborations are important. Like James Joyce was photographed by a woman called Giselle Freund, who was Austrian, and Joyce was living in Paris at the time, and Giselle took these amazing photographs, which you will have seen. Subliminally, it'll be in your head. So you say, I know that. And of course, Beckett, now my photographs of a thigh, because they're connected now, because Sam wanted to see my photographs, because I knew when he came to London in 1980, and I wanted to photograph him for 10 years prior to that. When in 1969, I was on the editorial floor of the Evening Standard, and it wasn't a particularly good time to be Irish because, there was a lot of things happening which were very strange. But I remember a backbench sub-editor. You can imagine what sub-editors looked like at the time. I mean, most of them they were all men at the time, shirts rolled up, and it's folios of stories coming from here and there and everywhere. And one scurrilous sub-editor shouted across to the picture desk. I just happened to be standing. Some obscure Irishman living in Paris has just won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Do we have any photographs? And, and there was only one rather bad photograph in the files of Samuel Beckett. At that moment, I thought, now I'd met 3 years earlier at the other painter, Francis Bacon, who was born in Dublin, from the similar tradition that Bacon was born into. And I'd photographed Francis Bacon. And the other Dubliner, Samuel Beckett, the reclusive Irishman, he fascinated. I wanted to track him down. This friend of mine, who was working in a hotel in London, in the Hyde Park Hotel, Liam, I think he was called. Liam actually said, John, the author Samuel Beckett is one of our guests. So at that time, I said, you joking me? He said, no, I saw him. Anyway, immediately I went down to the hotel, and the receptionist, a rather grand lady, said, I'm terribly sorry, but, we have no one of such name staying here. Okay. But I knew if Liam had told me this man he had a ferocious appetite for reading poetry and books and Irish, poems, Paddy Kavanagh, Yeats. He loved all that. If he said he was there, he was there. So I wrote a note to Mr. Beckett. Dear Mr. Beckett, I understand your aversion to journalism and to journalists and being photographed. I would understand if you don't want to answer this, but I would like to show you some photographs of a thigh, County Kildare, with a sequence on the wake, the last wake, the wake of Katie Tyrrell. I'll phone you up tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. The next morning, I was so excited, I phoned up, and the receptionist said, who's calling? And I was put directly through to his room. Mr. Minihan, thank you so much for your note. I'd very much like to see the photographs of a thigh. Suddenly, the wheels are in motion, things are happening. And that morning I went down, and I used to have a wonderful writer friend of mine, Stan Gebler Davis, and I said to him, we were drinking in an Alvino's at the time, this wine bar on Fleet Street. I said, Stan, I'm seeing Samuel Beckett tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And he almost choked in his Beaujolais. You're seeing Samuel Beckett tomorrow morning? And he said, you must talk to him about cricket. Now, I knew nothing about cricket. Now, of course, I wasn't even going to mention cricket. But what I knew by 20 photographs of a thigh with the sequence on the wake of Katie Tyrrell would be the entree. He wanted to see the photographs, and that was it. Got to the hotel, receptionist I thought he was going to come downstairs, just go through the usual sort of official procedures of hello, how you doing? That's it. But not at all. Send him up to my room. And, going into with the cameras into his hotel bedroom that was trust. I thought that was nice. But even I go walking down the corridor, I could hear my heartbeat. I was so excited because I wanted to relish every second of the moment spent with this great writer. I wanted to, and anyway, room 604. Little moments like that are important. Rooms, the number, where is room 604 will always be associated. Knock on the door, and then the door opens, and there he is. Ah, Mr. Minihan, come in. And he was such a kind, and he was so human to me. As I said, most professors say to me, how did you get the photographs? Because they studied Beckett, and they were expecting me to come up with some glib answer or something. They said, what did he talk about? I said, well, actually, Sam asked me, what was the price of a pint of Guinness in McDade's pot now? Which completely deflated because that's not what I wanted to hear. And I didn't understand that, but I do now. But that was the beginning, that was, suddenly I was watching him looking at the photographs, and it was just, I was sitting on the chair and he was sitting on the bed, and that was the beginning.
And tell us about your Paris shot in 1985.
In 1980, when Beckett came to London, he also returned again in 1984, and I was with him again then because we'd had that introduction, and I was photographing the plays and sending him some photographs. And but the thing I knew I wanted a photograph of Beckett in Paris. Paris, that they call it the City of Light, which discovered photography in 1839 when a man called Louis de Goeur ran onto his balcony and says, I have arrested the light. And that was kind of like, I've always been aware of that. And of course, every time I went to Paris in the 60s, I was walking in the same streets as the Irish writer George Moore, James Joyce, Samuel Beckett, and Yeats, and but Paris, but and Francis Bacon, of course, but Beckett, that was his home. He spent 60 years of his life there nearly.
Besides Beckett, who has been the most memorable subject of your portfolio?
Who's been the most memorable? There's been so many of them. It's really difficult. Immediately coming to my head because my family, in a sense, you know what I mean? Your own family are memorable when you photograph your kids growing up, and there's moments there, and it's. But that's the thing. You see, a photograph. It's. I remember Francis Bacon. There's these automatic photographing, automatic photo booths, as they call them. You can go and you get those. You ever seen strips of photographs you can use for passports? And Francis Bacon, when he'd be running around Soho at night, because he used photography a lot in his paintings. The salient influence in Bacon's work is a photograph, like Andy Warhol. He'd be inconsequential without a photograph, Andy Warhol. He just would. You've seen those pictures, one of Elvis, the film still of Elvis with a gun, or Marilyn Monroe. I mean, they have a flush painting over them, but it's all done. Photography that's how potent it is, like as a medium.
And do you have any hero?
I do. I think I do have heroes, and but I want to keep them to myself because I'm not. Sometimes it's like a totem pole. You don't want. I'm not here on any kind of crusade to do certain things, but I have heroes. But I'm going to keep them to myself because they embellish me with. I just had 2 years nearly. I'm going through a procedure for cancer. And I couldn't have got through this. Two different bouts, one in my oral cancer, and then the kind of in my tummy. And of course, you couldn't get through this without belief. But I keep those other things to myself.
What has been the pinnacle of your career?
Being able to give something back. To be here talking to you guys today, and to give something back. That's a blessing in itself. have the health to do that, to share the good.
Your correspondence is now on display in Dublin. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It's only in the last maybe 15, 12 years that Ireland has suddenly caught on to the importance of photography. Like a collection of my photographs are on permanent collection in the Princess Grace Irish Library in Monaco. You know what I mean? Everyone's there, from Beckett to the graves of W.B. Yeats to Thomas More. And of course, the National Gallery has some of my correspondence with Beckett. And of course, my archive in 2014, University College Cork has my archive from about 2014, you know. Although I'm continually taking photographs, you know, there's always little things percolating in my head. Got to keep the marbles working all the time, you know.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you so much, and good luck on your journey. It's not going to be easy, but you know, good luck for it. I love it. Thank you so much.